Satan is out to destroy us. And we think about that statement. Can you hear me now? Volume down a little. When we think about the statement that Satan is out to destroy us, we say, yeah, I know that. We know that. If we've been Christians for any time, if we have been studying God's word, we know that Satan is out to destroy us. But there's something that we don't always think about. We think about Satan's efforts to hurt us, to destroy us, to tear down our faith individually. I know how he works on me, and I know he works on you the same way. But what we sometimes don't think about is the effort of Satan to attack the church. And I don't mean the church in the global sense, universal sense. I'm talking about this church and every other congregation of the Lord's people. Satan works to destroy the local church. If we think about, here's our analogy, if we think about a hunter who is looking through the scope on his rifle, you're trying to take those crosshairs in there to hit your mark. And we need to understand that we are in the crosshairs of Satan. That he is looking for us, he is aiming for us. And it is his intent to destroy us. And in fact, that's just what he does. We are in the crosshairs of Satan, and that is something that we have to understand in the most profound way. We need to understand Satan's attempts to destroy local churches. He is very effective in that pursuit. He's good at what he does. There's a part of me that it pains me, and I've said it from time to time, Satan is really good at what he does. I hate to give him any credit. But we have to understand the effectiveness of Satan and how well he works on us, how well he can work himself in and infiltrate himself into a church and cause problems and try to destroy it. We need to be aware of his tactics, and we need to be prepared to fight him. And so to be clear that, this class is not about what we might be most familiar with, that is Satan's personal attacks on us, but on his efforts on a congregational level. And so to make it more personal, we need to think about what are Satan's plans for this church. It's been interesting to me over the course of the last year, and even a little time before we came, to sit with the elders and to listen to some of their thoughts and plans for the church and some of their areas of concern, and to realize that they've got a plan. That was encouraging to me. And I'll tell you, that was not a small part in our decision to come here, was the fact that the elders had a plan for the church and things that needed to be done and worked on a course and direction. Well, let's understand, Satan has a plan too. But his plan is very different than that of our shepherds or that of our Lord. His plan is to destroy. And it has happened time and time again, all around the world, congregations that have suffered because of the efforts of Satan. When Satan somehow makes his way into a church and gets a foothold there and starts to infiltrate and starts to do his work against what is right, what is good, and harms the church. And so churches have to be on guard. The Apostle Paul to the elders from Ephesus, he said, take heed to yourselves and to all the flock. And he goes on to say, watch. You think about the words of warning that give us the mind to be on guard. Some versions, in fact, say, be on guard of yourselves and to the church, or be alert. And maybe those are terms and thoughts that work well in our mind and help us to understand that we do, in fact, have to be on guard. And the scary part to me is that it seems the harder a church tries to serve the Lord, the greater effort Satan is going to make to destroy it. It's what he does. and he's good at what he does. And so again, the purpose of this study is to make sure that we are equipped, that we are organized, that we are on alert, so that we can be ready and recognize the onslaught of Satan's plans against the church. Knowing our enemy, our first point in our outline, knowing our enemy. Let's spend a minute here thinking about this. When you think about, sports, in some ways I hate to think about a sports team, looking at the opposing team as an enemy. That sounds kind of harsh. But, if you're going to be effective in sports, you have to know your enemy. You're trying to destroy their plan. You're trying to outthink and be strategic and be able to accomplish what they can or stop them from doing what they want to do. And, you think about, in big sports teams, they'll go to some great efforts to try to understand what the opposing team is going to do. I mean, a football team would sure love to know, all the calls that the other team is going to call and know what that means to them. So I'm the car guy. And if you listen to some of the radio traffic in a car race, in a NASCAR race, then the spotter on the 26 is saying, the 14 is taking the lower line. Watch what the 14's doing. He's 2/10 faster than you. So they're trying to figure out what the other team is doing. The 26 car just came in for 2 tires. We're going to take 2 tires only on this pit stop. Strategic. Trying to understand what the enemy is doing. That's what you have to do if you're going to win. We need to understand our enemy, and that our enemy is Satan. We need to know his plans. And we have to develop a strategy to overcome his efforts. Let's go in our Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. We're going to read 2 or 3 passages here, and I've got some questions for you. Some things I want us to think about. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, where the Apostle Paul is in the middle of a discourse here talking about the need of forgiving those who have repented, those who have changed, those who have made their life what it needs to be. And it's in the latter part of that discourse in verse 10 that he says, now whom you forgive anything, I also forgive. For if indeed I have forgotten anything, whom I have forgiven it for your sakes in the presence of Christ, lest Satan should take advantage of us. For we are not ignorant of his devices. I think it's an interesting thought that the apostle is saying, look, we know what Satan is trying to do. We understand his game plan. And so we're not ignorant of these things. And I guess what I'm hoping that we will be able to say is, well, we're not ignorant either. We know what he's trying to do. But then he uses this phrase here, we are not ignorant of Satan's devices. My question to you, what's he talking about? I mean, what are the devices that Satan would use? What have you come up with? What are you thinking about?
He's talking about forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And where feelings get hurt and there's resentment that is then held and builds up. It's just a fracturing of the unity that the congregation needs.
In the context here, speaking about forgiveness, it's a reminder to us that when somebody has changed their life or there's been some wrong that's been righted and there's forgiveness that is given, it needs to be just that. And have you ever seen a situation where someone's unwilling to forgive or says that they forgive, but really deep down they haven't because you can tell in their actions? Isn't that what Satan would want? And in the local church, I'm afraid I've seen that be a problem. Expand on it a little bit. The idea of Satan's devices. What are Satan's devices? What all would that refer to? What are some thoughts?
When someone comes in and presents something that is against God's word,
Sure.
trying to make it part of that congregation and what they do, that is the device that he uses.
Sure.
Or to using money is collected for things that we shouldn't. And if somebody proposes that, Satan can set that person to try to disrupt that whole congregation.
Right. Okay, good. Ben?
I think just in a general sense, we would say anything that can be used to foment division and create factions or separations between individuals or groups in the church.
Sure.
That could be a number of things, but that's a very broad,
It is.
broad scheme.
But you're right. I think exactly right. Other thoughts, ideas? Barry?
I think in this specific instance, there was a toleration of evil, inside the church.
Yeah.
Brother. And, there was harsh punishment put upon him too, but he repented. And there,
Right.
like you said,
That's right.
it's not repentance, or acceptance there.
Very good. That's right. Go ahead, Tim.
I think complacency is a big issue with us. When we're doing well, this is individually or as a congregation,
Yeah.
when we're doing well for a while, we kind of put it in cruise control. We think that we don't need to be proactive, but that's where we're actually most vulnerable, when we think we don't need to be doing anything more.
Right. That's right. We get complacent that way. Tim?
From the beginning of time, Satan has tried to convince man that he has a better idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why we see very specific qualifications for elders in the Lord's church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wisdom and experience to be able to come over that. I think that's right. Yeah.
Specific advice is every all of those individuals emotion.
Yes.
So something that absolutely causes just doesn't belong here.
Right. That's right.
Get the emotions going within it. How can you be against this cause?
Right.
That's where it gets.
Satan is so effective at that very thing, being able to stir emotions where even sometimes reason goes out the window. The ability to discern right and wrong from Scripture. I've seen this. That goes out the window because of emotions that just become overwhelming. Satan has a lot of devices. I mean, we can look at just some of the overall concerns, anything that's evil. But boy, we can make a list of specific devices.
I was thinking discouragement.
Oh yes.
One of those best ones, we can stop you from doing it, he doesn't have to counter it once you do it.
That's exactly right. If he can discourage us individually or congregationally, that in itself seems to just implode, and destroy any forward momentum of a church, the life of a church. Okay, so the next question here was, my statement was, Satan does not want the church to succeed. Thinking in a local level again, okay? Not thinking of the church of all the saved. We're thinking of the church in a local level. The church, Satan does not want to see the Taylor's church succeed. But what does that mean exactly? How do some people measure success of a church?
By numbers.
Yeah, by numbers. Yeah, I remember one time riding a car with somebody, and it was on a Sunday morning. We went by this. It was a church they had police out directing traffic and everything. And they said, this person, I remember the church was somebody we picked up for church actually. And they said, well, I don't know anything about that church, but they must be doing something right. Look at all the people that are going there. As though that's the criteria. Okay. And we have to be careful, that we don't get in this mindset, well, man, there's been a lot of folks come join with us lately. We must be doing something right, as though it's all on us. It's about us. What else? What else here? How do some people measure success of a church?
Some are very proud of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, look at what we're doing. We're supporting men in Africa, and we're doing this. And, we start thinking real well of what we are doing. What else?
We have to love each other and not let judgments get in the way. Because when we get judgments in the way, then that may cause problems. And if you, even if we know if somebody's living an immoral life, we should go to that person and try to get them.
Deal with that.
I mean, and the devil's always there. I mean, every time I think I get tempted, I just start singing Amazing Grace.
It's a good reminder.
Yes.
There are a lot of things that we can put out and float out there as why we are successful. But there's everything wrong with that statement that we are successful. You know, what attributes does God look at to determine success? Jonathan?
For good or for bad, you can look at the first couple of chapters of Revelation and see, the persecuted church, they were faithful despite persecution.
Yeah.
For the others, both good and bad in those chapters.
Right. That's right. That's right. In John chapter 8, there's a familiar passage. In John chapter 8, if you look there with me. In John chapter 8, in verse 31, we'll begin. Jesus is the speaker. And he's speaking to some there who were believers in him. John chapter 8, verse 31, Jesus said, "If you continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And we think about it in just a general way. What does God look at for success in a church? Well, it's knowing and adhering to his word, following his word. Then we are his disciples. Simple point, but sometimes we just need to bring that around front and center. We think about our strength to overcome Satan's attack. And we are on the side of strength. We have something to fight with. We have something to use. The power is found in Christ. That's what we have on our side. And so there are some passages that I think help to kind of put that point in the forefront. Let's look at two passages. Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 14 is what we are looking at. And I just want to make a simple point here, a quick point. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. "Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil." We stepped into the context here of a text that was talking about what Jesus has done, that he came in the flesh so that he could see, he could understand what we face, what we deal with in the flesh. Jesus came and lived a life that was like that. For what purpose? That he might destroy the one who has power over death, that's Satan, and he did. And the point here is for us to understand that strength is on our side. That is, Christ is on our side. So there's our hope. Turn a few pages further to 1 John. 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3. We look at verse 8. "He who practices sin is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil." Let's put things in perspective. Let's understand that if we practice sin, we're on the wrong side. If we practice sin, we're on the side of the devil. But God has sent his Son to present to us the other side, the one who can destroy sin. Turn the page. Chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 4. "You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he in the world, who is in the world." In the context, the apostle was talking about those spirits that are against God and the Antichrist. And he's saying to these Christians, you're not like them. You are not like them because you have overcome them because of the one who has the greater power than the world, that being Christ. And so when we think about Satan and what he is trying to do and his plan to destroy us, and we understand his power, never underestimate the ability and power of Satan. But we know and understand that the power of the Lord is greater, that he has overcome, and that we can overcome when we are with him. Marcus.
The word
gives us a great assurance in that resist the devil and he will flee from you.
Yes.
Therefore, a great focus of the whole topic that we're talking about is resisting
Sure.
the devil
Hmm.
and all of those things. The word teaches us very clearly how to do that.
That's right.
And practice.
And that we can.
Those practice, but we have an assurance.
Yes.
And that assurance guarantees success in the way that God intended.
That is right. That is right. Look, I think there's some things that we can learn from the past. I mean, that's true just in our lives daily. There's just in the secular sense, I wish we knew history a little bit better. I think we have lost history in this country. And there's some things we need to be reminded of from the history of this country. We can see, we understand that. I mean, how many times have we even said to our children or now our grandchildren, let me tell you about something that happened when I was a kid. If there was a lesson learned that maybe we learned the hard way, and we don't want our kids to have to learn it the hard way like we did. Let me tell you about this. There are lessons to be learned from the past. And for Christians, for the church, there's some things we can learn from the past. We're going to try to take a quick overview of some points here in the book of Acts, several passages. We're not going to spend much time on each one. But I'm real anxious to hear some comments or points that you might make. And if you got the outline this week and you looked at it, here was the challenge for this. It says, in one sentence, summarize what Satan was trying to do to the early church.
Can't do it in one sentence.
Well, we're looking from passage to passage. Okay, then I'm not going to call on you, so we don't have time. I actually have more than one point, too.
Yeah,
But we're just going to look at just very brief points here, because we have a lot of passages and we won't get done. But we're just trying to make a quick point with this. Let's identify the attacks of Satan on the early church. Was it attack from the outside or was it attack from the inside? I think we can see that pretty clearly, too. We're in the book of Acts. And we're not looking at every opportunity we might have throughout the book of Acts. We're just pulling out a few. Acts chapter 4, verse 1. And as they spoke to the people, the priests, the captains of the temple, and the Sadducees came upon them, being greatly disturbed that they taught the people and preached through Jesus the resurrection from the dead. And they laid hands on them and put them in custody until the next day. And it was already evening. Speaks about the apostles and some of the opposition that they faced. Where did the opposition come from? Where? External. It's from the outside. They were facing this opposition from some of the leaders of the Jews there. But the word continued to spread, verse 4. However, many of those who heard the word believed, and the number of men came to be about 5,000. And so you see Satan's attack. It was very real and physical among the early Christians. But the word continued to spread. Chapter 5. We're not going to read this whole text right here, but the first 11 verses or so. Who are the main players in this text? Ananias and Sapphira. All right, what happened? What happened? They lied. They lied. And they tried to fool the church. But what did Peter say about them in that effort? Yeah, they tried to deceive God, and they're not going to do that. And so was this attack from the inside or the outside? Internal. It was a problem inside the church. And boy, you think about where this could have gone. I mean, Peter was there, dealt with it right now, and brought to attention the whole church what had happened. And then the end result was, and great fear came upon all the church and all those who had heard these things. And things continued to move on. Still in chapter 5, verse 17. Then the high priest rose up, and all those who were with him, which is the sect of the Sadducees, and they were filled with indignation. They laid their hands on the apostles and put them in the common prison. Where was the attack from? Inside or outside? It's from the outside. The Jewish leaders continually after the apostles in the early church. But as the text goes on, an angel of the Lord spoke to them, to the apostles, and released them from prison, and the word continued to be preached. God's power over Satan. Let's be sure we see that. Chapter 6, verse 1. In those days when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a murmuring against the Hebrews by the Hellenists, because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. Then the 12 called the multitude of the disciples to them and said, it's not desirable that we should leave the word of God to serve tables. There's a problem. External or internal? Internal issue. It was a race issue, really, is what it was. And think about this problem. There were some that were being neglected, and they knew they were being neglected, and others were coming to know they were being neglected. Think about where this could have gone. Think about what kind of issue this could have been. I'll just say this. Just an observation. Internal problems are the worst, in my judgment. I mean, when there are problems coming from the outside, it just seems like we can identify those. I mean, if somebody came in just kind of out of the blue, we say, and brought some new idea or brought some kind of issue to the church, we would quickly say, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. Now, that's not right. You can't come in here and say that. But problems that start on the inside, those work differently and have to be dealt with so carefully and quickly. Notice the quick response of the apostles. The verses following. The apostles immediately had a plan, says, here's what we need to do. Got the church involved in finding resolution, and they moved forward. That wasn't Satan's plan. Satan wanted to cause problems. Satan's effort was to try to cause insurrection and division. God's power is greater. And if we work with God, whatever issues come at us, we can overcome. Same chapter, verse 8. And Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. Then there arose some from what is called the synagogue of the freedmen, and the Cyrenians and Alexandrians, and those from Cilicia and Asia, disputing with Stephen. And they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. Here's the problem. Inside the church or outside the church?
Outside.
Seems to be outside. We learn more about Stephen. Stephen is introduced to us earlier in chapter 6. One of the men who was serving the church there. And as we go through chapter 7, certainly we learn more about Stephen. The boldness of his faith is not deterred in any way. This was the effort right here to get Stephen to be quiet. But it doesn't slow him up at all. In fact, as we get into chapter 7, if you read through chapter 7, it's the whole chapter is Stephen preaching to the Jewish leaders. And in the latter part of chapter 7, verse 56, Stephen said, look, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. And then they cried out with a loud voice, stopped their ears, and ran at him with one accord. And they cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at the feet of a young man whose name was Saul. Remember the story about Stephen? Stephen's faith was not deterred in any way, even when there was great opposition, even in the face of death. You think about these examples, we have some more here, but I just want us to stop and think for a minute about the efforts of Satan and how it comes up from different sides. from outside the church, from inside the church. Satan is always there trying to destroy. This was the early church. And in fact, at this time, this was the church in Jerusalem. It hadn't spread, but it's fixing to. And so you think about the efforts of Satan. If he could destroy the church in Jerusalem, he could stand back and say, I've done it. You know, I've destroyed what the Lord came to establish. But he couldn't. I think just again, we have to see and understand that Satan has great ability and power. He's good at what he does. The power of the Lord is greater. Thoughts or comments you have regarding this? Yes.
Okay, Ephesians 6 in verse 11, I like this in connection with what you brought out. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to take a stand against the devil's.
We have the ability to stand against the devil. When I say we, let me clarify, we is not us alone. You know, but because of the power of God, because of what he has provided, we can stand against the devil. And when we look at the early church, we see that. We see the efforts of Satan. We can clearly identify, we can also clearly identify the efforts that were made to put him back. And we have to be able to do that too, because Satan will work against us in the same way.
The point you made earlier about internal problems being worse than external. I think other passages in the New Testament will confirm that. But it seems that external persecution brings the church together. Mm-hmm. There are some who may be weaker in faith that persecution does discourage and deter. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a separation of wheat and chaff when it comes to the strength of faith. But the strong in faith, persecution unites. Mm-hmm. And you see that here in Jerusalem. But the internal problems, there's almost never a uniting that comes from that, unless it's after the problem has been dealt with and it's a restoration on the other side.
It seems to me seldom is there an internal problem that is resolved without there being a loss of some type, which is just always so painful to see. That there are those who fall away because of the problems. There are factions that develop. There's division that takes place. If Satan can divide, he can conquer. And he knows that. He knows his plan that way. That's a good point, Ben. Dan.
Satan's willing to be very patient. It doesn't have to be changed overnight.
Exactly.
He's willing to take years and by degree, little change here, and just overall movement flows away from his word and what he wants.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Alan.
I think it's also interesting to understand that we don't always recognize his tactics as being evil or deceitful. 2 Corinthians 11 says that sometimes he has the ability to transform himself into an angel of light.
Right.
So he can come at us and we might think, well, this is a good idea. This is a great thing. We have to pray for wisdom and make sure that we can discern whether or not this thing is really from God or whether it's from Satan. Mm-hmm. And you say, he's not dumb, he's not stupid. So he's going to use the things that he knows is going to appeal to us to get us to his bidding.
And sometimes that plan seems to be ever changing. I mean, the end result that he wants is always the same, to destroy the cause of Christ. But Satan can come at us from different ways, you know, using different tactics to infiltrate, to destroy us. I mean, you think about the persecution of the church in Acts chapter 7, the stoning of Stephen. I mean, Satan must have been thinking for sure, this will do it. I mean, these disciples now, I mean, they'll be scared and they'll run away. Well, there was some movement away from Jerusalem because of persecution. Chapter 8, verse 1. And Saul was consenting to his death And at that time, a great persecution arose against the church, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial and made great lamentation over him. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere, preaching the word. Satan didn't win. The power of Christ is greater every time. Our time is gone. Thank you so much for being here. Lord willing, next Sunday, same time.